everyone, and welcome back to another author interview. Today I am bringing to you guys a really exciting self-published Saturday with author Abigayle Clare. I am so excited for this interview, so let's just get into it because I am really excited to learn and hear more about Abigaille's stories.
Hi, I am Abigayle Clare. I am the author of Martin Hospitality, its sequel Martin Legacy, and Andora's Folly, which is an entirely separate book. I am the oldest of 8. I'm a homeschool graduate, and I do freelance editing, both for my own clients and for Havoc Publishing. I pretty much knew I wanted to go indie at first without a whole lot of extra thought because I wanted the control over my first book and I really wanted to learn the publishing process. So I knew I was going to go independent, and as far as writing Christian fiction, that was also a bit of a no-brainer because I am Christian, and so everything I write is going to have some of my Christian worldview in it, just kind of by default. But my 2 full-length novels specifically deal with Christian issues from a Christian perspective, and include God as an actual character, whereas I don't intend to necessarily do that in all of my writing. So it takes me an average about 18 months a book if I do the project straight through, instead of taking a break in the middle to switch projects or do something else. Sometimes I do that, but if I'm going to go through the entire process in one run, in general it takes me about 18 months. I think that's about what Martin Hospitality took me, my first full-length novel. My next publication was Andora's Folly, and because it was so much shorter, I actually wrote that entire draft in a month and then took a break, and I published it much faster, like when I was actually working on it, but it was still about an 18-month cycle because I had a long break in there. And then with my sequel, Martin Legacy, that was also a full-length novel, it took me more like 2 to 2.5 years off and on. I definitely took some breaks on that one, but it was just a much harder book for me to write, so the whole writing process took me longer. And so it took me a lot longer to get to the editing process and actual publication. I always try to make a bit of a roadmap for myself, just a little bit of a timeline so that I know what to expect and I can go ahead and contact my editor and be like, hey, I'm working on a project, just to start having the people I employ or that I contract with like pencil me in, so that way I can just start planning ahead. I operate much better doing it that way, but it's of course not a like hard deadline because life usually happens and that usually changes my plans. So but a little bit of an idea gives me something to tell my street team, something to tell my editor, my formatter, my cover designer, and to get all of those balls rolling, even though I usually have to adjust and let everyone know as I go. So I have paid for an editor, a formatter, and a cover designer with all 3 of my books. Doesn't mean it has to be expensive, but I do find value in outsourcing all 3 of those, and it just tends to result in a higher quality product, which is something I'm very much invested in, and thus I have more impressed and happier customers overall, and that is something I very much strive for. And I think overall that just means that I feel much better about the quality of my product having actually paid professionals to do it. So even though that's a money investment, I very much use freelance friends to do it so that it's not this gigantic cost to me, but is still other eyes on the project to help it be the best that it can be. I have definitely found value in hiring out both editing and formatting and cover designing, mainly because I find with editing, even though I am an editor, and this is the case with everyone, that when you're reading your own work, you don't read it the way your readers will read it necessarily. You know what you mean. So I recommend to everyone that they have other eyes on their project, whether that's a friend reading for free or an editor you're hiring. I mean, someone is better than no one. But I would recommend hiring an editor. And then for formatting and cover design, those people can have genuine skills that can be brought to their own projects just as well as anyone else's. But I think I've seen plenty of independently published authors be just good enough at cover design to do it themselves, and then it's still not great. And the same with formatting. So just because you can doesn't mean you should in indie publishing. And I do not have any cover design skills at all, or formatting, and those are things you can teach yourself and be very good at, in which case there's nothing wrong with doing it for yourself. But really, unless that's a skill you're good enough at to market to other people, I don't think it's something you should necessarily do for yourself, because then I think you're kind of selling your own product short of what it could be just for the sake of saving a little money. And then, I mean, just in my opinion, then it's not as high quality, and it doesn't stand out as much from the other self-published products out there, because there's a lot these days. So as an indie author, you're everything. You're the author, you're the publisher, you're the marketer. So even outsourcing everything else, you still have a lot of roles to play and a lot of hats to put on. And I don't see that as a downside, but it is something to know going in, because it's a huge time investment and a very large learning curve when you're first getting into it. So definitely take your time and do your research, so that you can be confident with what you are bringing to the table as all of those different roles as the indie author. I have loved learning the ins and outs. Personally, it's one of the reasons I chose to do self-publishing in the first place. But for some people it is very overwhelming. But I found it to be a very rewarding process with a lot of benefits of just generally knowing what I'm doing now. And how to go about the process, and that helps me then do things like this interview, where I can share some of my experiences with other people and encourage them on their own indie author journey. One of the best things I've ever done is start a blog. Even though I am not as regular on it anymore, when I began my blog, I had a friend who already had several hundred blog followers launch me. I did a guest post as my very first post on her blog, and then we put the link to my blog in the post I did on her website, and that directed all her followers to go over and look at my blog. And it instantly gave me a follower base to start with, and a friend circle to plug into of like-minded people. And I highly recommend you find a way to do that, whether that's on social media or whatever platform you choose to begin with. I found that to be the most beneficial jumpstart to my career, even though I didn't have anything published yet. I was barely working on writing my first novel. But plugging into that community and having that accountability and encouragement and that resource pool is really what kept me going for publishing my first book. I also, I do use social media. I use my blog, and I've done local events. Word of mouth is still the best resource for marketing, but all of those things can be used well. It is definitely a lot to figure out, but I think I very much just try to be pretty regular, pretty consistent on social media. I try to be myself. I try to share a host of just like what I'm up to today, or what I'm editing right now, what I'm reading right now, what I'm writing right now. Details like that that are part of my life, but also part of my brand as an author as well, just to kind of keep all of that circulating so people do know what I'm about. And I've found overall that is very that has been very successful for me overall, just in connecting with people, because that's ultimately what it comes down to in order to build a fan base, or, you know, your readers, your target audience. While I do keep my social media up to date with kind of more of my slice of life updates and, you know, late night writing sprees and things like that, I have a street team that, mostly via email and also a Facebook group, I keep a closer circle up to date with the incident ins and outs of my writing, and they get to see things first and know things first, and it's their kind of responsibility in return to help me out if they have time to in spreading the word anytime I do a cover reveal or I announce my release date, or a book actually comes out, pre-orders are up, whatever it is. I have them that have been knowing the most and getting excited the longest to then send out on social media to help me spread the word, because I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still just one person. And so I found that to be an extremely helpful way to have friends join you in announcing a book release. And I definitely recommend, even if you're just doing like a Google form, each time you have something you want to announce, or you're having friends do it on their blogs or their Instagram, there's a bunch of ways to do it. But having friends help you spread the word and having them sign up to help you spread the word, then all you have to do is send them a reminder email and the picture they should share or what have you. And I found that to be a very effective way to spread the word to more people and kind of expand my reader base as I go. So I definitely recommend something along those lines, even if you go more basic than a full-fledged monthly newsletter street team. I did not have that until my most recent release. And for my most recent release, I've done a lot of different things as far as like perks and how I release it. Originally, I would only do blog tours, but because I am less frequent on my blog now, instead of just giving people posts to share on their blog posts and on their blogs, I this time around I did an Instagram photo challenge, and I almost always do something with ARCs, with advanced reader copies, whether it's ebooks only for my street team, or I send physical copies to all my beta readers, or what have you. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. But kind of all of those different things are the different things I look at anytime I'm releasing, all building up to release day and then getting reviews up as soon as possible. That's the perk of having ARCs out there earlier than the release date, is so that I can then have people posting reviews pretty soon after publication, and that helps kind of, especially with Amazon, it helps keep it in their search engines higher. So anyway, things like that are what I have found to be engaging for people and fun to organize too. It's a lot to organize, but I don't do all of that every time. Before I started indie publishing, I kind of wish I'd known how technical it was. That was not a bad thing to learn as I went. I don't regret that, but I had no idea how much was going to be involved until I got into it. So, I mean, just things I'd never thought about, like ISBNs and things like that that are completely on the author's shoulders as an independent author. So just, I mean, if you haven't gotten into the indie publishing world yet, know that there is a lot to it. That's not a bad thing, but it is a lot to take in. So give yourself the time to learn that. And then the only other thing I kind of wish I would have known, or I wish someone would have told me, is that my first finished novel, my first finished draft, a book that I had actually completed a draft on and revised, I wish somebody had told me that that didn't have to be my first published book, because it was my first published book. And I don't regret that. I'm still very proud of my first published book. It is the one that has done the best out of the 3 that I have published so far. So definitely don't have any regrets. I do think I finished it because it's the story God laid in my heart to finish and to publish. But there's also nothing wrong with writing a book that ends up being just for you. Or one that's just not there yet, that you need to set aside for years, which is something I'm doing right now with its story. And so there's nothing wrong with doing it that way either. So don't feel pressured to publish. This very much needs to be a heart decision before diving into the crazy world of indie publishing. So dealing with hard topics, I wanted to remain sensitive, but also be realistic at the same time. That's the balance I was trying to achieve. And so in order to do that, I very much had to pretend to be my main character. And in many ways I'm not. I have not had many of the experiences that I give her, so it required imagination, and it required having witnessed those experiences secondhand, knowing people who'd been through those things, but very much just putting myself in my main character's shoes to kind of imagine just the emotional process she would have had going through things that we see people go through all the time, like teenage pregnancy and dealing with a hard past, trauma, shame. All of that are things that many people deal with on different levels. So I very much had to be intentional about just imagining how that would have gone down for my particular character, how she would have processed that. But I wanted to bring, like, part of the reason I chose to deal with hard topics is I wanted to bring these struggles and these questions that many people have, especially people who don't know Jesus, and I wanted to show the people who are broken and struggling and still very lost, joining hands with people who can be very, very different with them, but grounded, the people who know Jesus. And so even though it's a bit of a culture clash, as I portray it in my novels, with the pregnant teenage girl who is taken in by a homeschooling Christian family, those are very different people. But seeing how there was no reason they couldn't join forces and be good examples to each other, teach each other things, even when it was accidental, and really showing how walking that road together, I don't think it happens enough in real life, but I wanted to show how that is very much a real and possible and biblical thing to do. And so that was kind of part of the reason I set out to show hard things in the first place, was also to show kind of the redemption and the beautiful broken process that can be as people come through it. For the people who have been through hard things, I very much hope that they get a sense of encouragement and know that they're not alone, and that even people who are very different from them still love them and still care about what they're going through, even when they can't understand what they're going through. But I hope that everyone finds a point of relation and gets encouragement from my books. And for those who are more like me, who are the homeschooling Christians, who had a much more sheltered lifestyle, I hope that they get perhaps a broadened perspective of seeing what I hope is a realistic portrayal of some very difficult things that many, many people go through. And just knowing that even though that was not your normal per se, it is a lot of other people's normal, and just knowing how to deal with that when you face it in the real world, because you're going to. So just learning how to be sensitive and finding the characters that you relate to. I was not planning on writing a sequel initially. By the time I published the first book, I had decided to write a sequel, and that was a new development. But, so because I was excited for that, I dove straight into, as soon as I had published my first book, Martin Hospitality, I dove straight into writing the second book, Martin Legacy. And I burned out mentally and physically very quickly, and I got very discouraged because of that, because I had never tried to write a book that I wasn't ready to write. That's how I published Martin Hospitality in the first place, is because it was a story that came together when I sat down to write it, and that is not what was happening with this sequel. So I attended a writer's conference. I took a break, and I attended a writer's conference and pitched another story idea I had on a whim. And because there was some interest in that, I took time off to then write that story. I took a break completely from my sequel because I think I just wasn't ready. I didn't have the vision and the details down well enough to really know where I was going with it. And so I took almost an entire year off of writing the sequel. And then when I came back to it, it was still hard, but I started completely over. Ignored anything I had written before, which was really hard. I hate having to throw away words, but it was worth it, and it's very much the process I was meant to go through, because I needed to grow before I was ready to write the sequel and make it what I wanted it to be. And so by the time I finally got back to it, I was much more refreshed, and I had kind of figured out how to achieve the fragmented vision I had for it. But it very much took God growing me through that process and very slow development. I had no idea what I wanted to do for the cover. I had no idea how to make the timeline I wanted work. And so just lots of things that were taller orders than I'd given myself before that very much came together, because I figured a sequel would be easier because I already knew the cast and the setting and generally what I wanted to happen. So I wasn't starting from scratch, but it was hard. It was harder than I expected. So that's really just the difficulties is what took me the 2 years. It's figuring out what I was doing, but it wasn't alone. And even once I finally knew from help with friends and my mom and God kind of like gently nudging me different directions, I decided that, plodding away at it was finally working. And so even then it took me a long time to get it written down, to do the outsourcing and the polishing. And so it was a long process all the way through. But I'm very much happy with the way it is now. So it was a worthwhile process. It was just a very long road. So as I said before, I think I expected a sequel to be easier because I knew the cast and I knew the setting. I had the characters, everything. But coming up with themes to me are one of the strongest points of a book. And it was hard for me to come up with entirely new themes but still continue previous themes and continue to develop characters that really didn't demand a sequel. There was not a huge cliffhanger at the end of book 1 that left all of these things unresolved. And so even though I knew I wanted to write a sequel, it was very much an easy continuation that I had in mind. And it just became very difficult to basically try and follow characters for years of their lives. So I just wasn't prepared for the challenge that was going to be. So doesn't mean I will never write another sequel. I probably will, but if I do, I intend to approach it as a series from the beginning and thus make it a little easier, I think, to continue developing characters throughout the entire series. I felt like I wrote myself into a little bit of a corner with this series, and it all worked out. I'm very happy with how it worked out, but I think that's one of the reasons I struggled so much with this particular sequel. As I said earlier, I think it's completely okay to write things that you never intend to publish. That's kind of what Andora's Folly was for me. It is my wild child and my odd one out right now. I wrote the entire draft in a month. I wanted to try my hand at a retelling, so I did it during a Camp National Novel Writing Month. Wrote the entire first draft of 30,000 words in a month, which I've never done since. And it just came together. It was fun, it was short. I chose to retell a Greek myth because finding a fairy tale that hadn't already been done 200 times was hard. And I love Greek mythology, so it really came together, and it became kind of just this passionate, fun, experimental writing thing that I did amongst friends. And it came together as a much more cohesive story than I expected it to. So I set it aside, and about 6 months later I picked it up again and said, okay, why don't I go ahead and publish this? And so I did. And it was really very fun. And I think the reason I felt like I could go ahead and publish it, even though it's different length, different genre, everything than Martin Hospitality, was because I intend to keep crossing genres as I write. I will probably mostly end up with a batch of contemporary fiction, of which I have 2 so far, and historical fiction, which is technically what Andora's Folly is. It's just also a retelling. So I felt like it wasn't going to be completely counter to my entire future brand to go ahead and publish something different than my first book. So I kept it under my same name and everything. But again, I think you should absolutely experiment with your writing and test yourself and try things out and write new things and grow as a writer. I think that's a big way of how writers do grow, is just trying new things. But I don't think that all the new things you try should necessarily be published. So it was a very tricky case with Andora's Folly, but I'm glad I published it. I think it worked out very well, and it was a completely unexpected writing journey, so it became and very rewarding in its own way, and hopefully someday I will have more historicals published to add to it. Thank you so much, Jenna, for having me on here. I really enjoyed getting to answer all these great questions you asked. If any of you who are watching have any follow-up thoughts or questions for me, or are curious about more details on anything, definitely feel free to leave a comment, and I will keep my eyes out for that and try to reply, because I would love to continue the conversation on all of these great topics that Jenna covered with her questions. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jenna, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you so much, Abigayle, for being willing to participate in this author interview. It means so much that you were willing to agree to this when I reached out to you and said, hey, I'm starting this new series. Would you like to participate and share more about your writing journey and your books? I really hope that you enjoyed participating in this interview, and I hope that people enjoyed hearing from you and learning more about you and your perspectives on writing. If there are any writers out there, I hope you guys were encouraged or inspired in some way. And if you're a reader, I hope you really consider picking up Abigayle's books, because they sound pretty good from what I've heard about them. So again, thank you so much to Abigayle, and thank you so much to everyone here for watching. If you want to learn more about Abigayle, all of her links and information will be listed in the description box below, as usual. My name is Jenna Van Mourik. I'm an inspired writer and an inspirational fiction reader who reads, writes, and lives for Jesus. I love sharing all things Christian fiction and biblical fiction here on YouTube once a week with videos of my own, and as well as on Instagram every single day with Bookstagram-inspired posts. I share videos of me talking about books and geeking out about Christian fiction and biblical fiction weekly here on YouTube, in addition to these weekly author interviews where I try to show you guys a little bit more of the inside look at the Christian fiction writing and publishing industry and get you guys some behind the scenes. And if you're a writer, give you guys some inspiration for your writing and some encouragement for your writing. Once again, you can find all of my links in the description box below. Thank you again so much for watching if you made it all the way through this interview, and I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you so much. Bye!